There are secrets about femininity that almost no one dares to admit. Secrets that don't appear in school books, aren't taught in self-discovery courses, and are often hidden even within one's own family. Carl Jung warned, "What is denied doesn't disappear. It only transforms into shadow." And the female psyche carries such complex layers that when revealed, it can shake everything you believed about love, power, intuition, and identity. Today's video won't offer you easy answers, but it will open doors you may never have dared to walk through. Brace yourself, because we're not talking about superficial concepts. We're talking about archetypes that shape your choices without you even realizing it, about masks that seem to protect but secretly imprison you, and about old wounds that still govern relationships and destinies. Have you ever stopped to think why some women, even strong and intelligent ones, repeat the same patterns of pain in love, career, or money? Or why, despite so much social evolution, there's still a silent emptiness that insists on surfacing? These answers are hidden in deep layers of the psyche, and today we'll explore each of them. Throughout this video, you'll discover how feminine intuition is much more than a feeling. You'll understand how dreams are sabotaged without you even realizing it, by invisible mechanisms that the ego disguises as prudence. You'll see how inner drama isn't just fragility, but an ocean of wisdom that, when understood, can become a compass. You'll realize how unconscious control hides in the details of every relationship, shaping behaviors and fraying bonds. And most importantly, you'll learn how unresolved paternal wounds still write secret stories in your present. But perhaps the most impactful moment is the end of this journey, the Great Awakening. The moment when masks fall, shadows are integrated, and authenticity finally emerges. Don't think, however, that this is something distant or reserved for a select few. Every woman at some point in her life is called to this process. What separates those who flourish from those who remain stuck is just one thing: the courage to look within. And in this video, you'll gain access to keys that can completely transform how you perceive yourself and how you relate to the world. So, if you've ever felt that there's something greater within you, something that routine can't explain, something that others don't recognize, but that insists on pulsing within your soul, this video is the invitation you've been waiting for. Let's explore together the 8 psychological secrets about the feminine that no one dares admit. And perhaps in the end, you'll discover that what you've always sought outside was hidden within you all along. When someone pronounces the word psyche, few imagine it carries more than an exotic sound. It's like a symbolic key that opens portals to a deeper understanding of the feminine and spirituality. Throughout history, what could not be named was pushed into the dark corners of the collective unconscious, and Carl Jung knew this better than anyone. The term refers to something that escapes rational definition, a hidden archetype that speaks directly to the body and soul. It's no wonder so many women feel an inner calling they can't explain, as if there were a secret language pulsing within them, but one that doesn't appear in conventional books. This sense of mystery is also the first gateway to shadow work, for where there is silence, there are hidden treasures. The psyche can be perceived when feminine intuition whispers at unexpected moments. It's that voice that says, "Don't trust," before the ego can rationalize, or that butterflies in the stomach that warns, "Something's wrong here." And the curious thing is that when ignored, this voice often proves correct later. Jung would call this an archetypal expression, where the psyche communicates truths through symbols, sensations, and even dreams. Imagine a woman about to accept a job that seems promising on paper, but deep down feels like a prison in disguise. If she silences this perception, she will likely reap frustration. The psyche, in this sense, is like a psychic alarm. It doesn't ring in vain, but demands to be heard. The fascinating thing is that psyche reveals itself not only in the depths of personal choices, but also in collective patterns. Consider how different cultures portray the figure of the priestess, the witch, or the ancestral mother. In all of them, there is the idea of a hidden, marginalized wisdom that holds secrets of survival. It is no coincidence that many women, upon beginning their journey of self-discovery, feel an immediate attraction to rituals, to nature, and to the observation of cycles. It is as if this archetype were engraved in their psychic DNA. This force does not ask the ego for permission to exist. It simply manifests itself, often through coincidences that Jung would call synchronicities. To bring this to the practical world, we can consider something simple: dream journals. Recording daily symbols, emotions, and intuitions is a way to communicate with this living archetype. Many may find it silly, but over time, patterns begin to emerge. A color that repeats, a figure that returns, a symbol that transforms. It's like putting together a puzzle where each piece brings a part of the psyche to the surface. Similarly, practices such as guided meditation, women's sharing circles, or even readings of ancient mythologies become bridges to give form to the invisible. Shadow work comes to life in this process because it allows us to identify not only the light of the archetype, but also the shadows it brings with it. This is why, when approaching psyche, a woman discovers more than mysticism. She finds an inner compass. The ego may struggle, try to rationalize, call it coincidence, but the psyche continues to insist on showing signs. Anyone who has experienced feeling like they knew without knowing understands what we're talking about. And this is where the secret bridge to the next step in this journey emerges. If psyche is the key, then feminine intuition is the door that needs to be crossed. A door that isn't always comfortable to open, but which reveals a path where spirituality and reality meet in a surprising way. Feminine intuition. Feminine intuition is like an invisible antenna that captures frequencies that the pure logic of the ego could never reach. Carl Jung said that the psyche speaks not only through words, but through symbols and sensations, and this is precisely what happens when a woman senses something before it actually happens. This perception isn't born by chance, but from an ancient wisdom that spans generations, accumulated in the deep layers of the collective unconscious. In simple terms, it's as if there were an internal radar always working, analyzing subtleties that escape the common eye. Many call this instinct, but spirituality recognizes it as a channel of dialogue between the soul and the invisible world. The curious thing is that when this intuition is followed, it rarely fails. When ignored, it almost always exacts its price in pain and learning. Imagine a woman on a seemingly perfect date. Good laughs, obvious chemistry, everything seems ideal. Yet deep down, she feels a slight unease, a silent voice that says, something is wrong. If she listens to this voice, she might later discover that her partner harbors toxic patterns that could compromise her peace. This kind of insight cannot be explained by reason alone, because it involves the psyche capturing micro-expressions, subtle energies, and even archetypes that shape human behavior. Carl Jung called this extra-rational perception, a natural mechanism that connects the persona to the invisible. In shadow work, this gift needs to be honed, because the same intuition that guides can also be distorted by traumas or old fears. The challenge is to separate what is profound wisdom from what is the echo of unhealed wounds. In practice, exercising feminine intuition doesn't require supernatural gifts, but rather listening practice. And here's a detail many overlook. Listening isn't just about hearing sounds, it's about perceiving nuances of silence, energy, and subtlety. Therefore, simple exercises like meditation, mindfulness, or even the habit of observing the body in different situations can help. The body is a map. When intuition speaks, it usually manifests with physical symptoms: butterflies in the stomach, a lump in the throat, a sudden acceleration of the heart. Spirituality teaches that the body is the soul's first oracle, but the ego, always in a hurry, insists on silencing these signals. Those who learn to stop and feel gain a reliable compass to navigate life. Interestingly, this intuition applies not only to relationships or personal decisions, but also to projects, careers, and even investments. How many times has someone felt that it wasn't the right time to enter a certain business, only to realize shortly afterward that they'd lost money? Jung would say that archetypes of abundance or scarcity manifest in how we react to opportunities. Women who develop this intuition can identify when a proposal is just a golden mask, or when it's truly an opportunity aligned with the self. Practical examples of this include calmly evaluating partnerships, observing how you feel in meetings, or even using journals to record hunches about important decisions. It's like listening to an invisible advisor who's always been there. However, there's a trap. Many women learn from an early age to doubt their own intuition. They're taught to prioritize other people's logic, to seek external validation, to trust numbers more than their own inner voice. This creates a deep conflict between spirituality and self-awareness, creating constant self-sabotage. When intuition is denied, choices emerge that seem safe but lead to inner emptiness. This is where the next hidden obstacle appears: the self-sabotage of dreams, a silent phenomenon in which the psyche itself erects barriers to personal fulfillment. Because, after all, it's not enough to feel the path. You have to believe you're worthy of walking it. Self-sabotage of dreams. Self-sabotaging dreams is one of the cruelest dilemmas the female psyche faces. It's not that there's a lack of talent, intelligence, or spirituality, but rather that the ego, conditioned from an early age, creates invisible barriers. How often does a woman have a brilliant idea, feel the flame of intuition ignite, but soon after, the inner voice arises saying, "You're not good enough. This is too big for you. Who do you think you are?" Carl Jung would say, "This is the shadow speaking, a set of repressed archetypes that, when not integrated, act as secret saboteurs." The curious thing is that these voices don't come from nowhere. Many were planted in childhood, echoing criticism, rejection, and comparisons that undermined confidence. The result is simple: huge dreams, but steps too small to achieve them. This self-sabotage process manifests itself in seemingly harmless behaviors. For example, procrastinating on important projects while busying yourself with irrelevant tasks, accepting social invitations only to avoid dedicating yourself to what truly matters, or even losing yourself in energy-draining relationships. It's as if the persona were trained to please and maintain external harmony, while the self cries out for expansion and authentic fulfillment. Here, shadow work becomes essential, because only by facing these unconscious patterns head-on can the cycle be broken. And the break is never just external, it's internal, symbolic, like choosing to look in the mirror and say, "Now I embrace what I came to build." It seems simple, but it's revolutionary. Self-sabotage also manifests itself in dreams of career and prosperity. Many women have ideas for entrepreneurship, creating their own projects, or investing in something they're passionate about, but they balk when it comes to taking action. Their excuses are often, "I don't have time," "I don't have money," or "it's not the right time." In reality, what they're experiencing is a fear of occupying their rightful space. Jung said that the collective unconscious carries memories of centuries in which the feminine was silenced, and this silence still manifests itself in the form of insecurity. It's like inheriting an emotional debt. But when this origin is recognized, the possibility of transforming the narrative opens up. Women cease to be victims of circumstances and become authors of their own story. In practice, breaking self-sabotage requires clear strategies. One is to write down 3 small actions every day that bring you closer to your dream. Nothing grandiose, just consistent steps. Another is to seek out references. Reading biographies of women who broke molds, like Frida Kahlo or Maya Angelou, inspires and activates new archetypes within the psyche. Even creating a support network with friends who encourage rather than criticize is a game changer. Spirituality acts as fuel, reminding us that each dream is not just individual, but part of a larger mission. When we understand this, the ego loses its power to sabotage because we realize it's not just about me, but about something that needs to be born through us. The most challenging part, however, is that the self-sabotage of dreams disguises itself as logic. It wears the mask of prudence, responsibility, and rationality. But behind this seemingly sensible persona lies a paralyzing fear of being seen in its true potential. And here lies the point that connects to the next topic. To sustain self-sabotage, many women resort to survival masks. These are personas that appear to protect, but in reality imprison. And while these masks seem effective at first, over time they reveal their unbearable weight. Because no dream can survive when authenticity is stifled. Survival masks. Survival masks are one of the most intriguing expressions of the psyche. Carl Jung described the persona as the social face we use to adapt to the world. But when this persona becomes a prison, the quietest pains emerge. Many women learn from an early age that to be accepted they must adopt pre-made roles. The one who pleases everyone, the victim who inspires pity, the seductress who conquers with her body, or the perfect one who never makes mistakes. Each mask seems at first like protective armor against external pressures, but over time it becomes an invisible cell. The ego believes it is being clever in creating these strategies, but spirituality reveals that they are merely distancing themselves from the self, as if the soul were suffocated in the name of other people's approval. These masks function as secret contracts with society. I'll sacrifice myself as long as you accept me. And the curious thing is that the more a woman strives to maintain these personas, the more distant she becomes from herself. The result is a seemingly organized life, but internally marked by emptiness and psychological conflict. It's the typical scenario in which everyone applauds, but she cries alone when no one sees. In shadow work, this is one of the first points of confrontation, realizing that what was believed to be who I am was in fact just a memorized role. It's painful to admit, but liberating to recognize that one no longer needs to act. And from that moment on, the psyche begins to breathe again. To better understand, just look at everyday examples. The woman who always says yes to everyone, even when exhausted, is wearing the good girl mask. The one who constantly dramatizes to be taken care of may be living the victim mask. The one who needs to be impeccable, flawless, wears the perfectionist mask. And the one who uses sensuality as a weapon of power acts under the mask of the seductress. None of these personas is entirely negative in itself. They all fulfill functions in certain contexts, but when they become fixed identities, they begin to drain vital energy. Jung warned, everything that is not conscious manifests as destiny. In other words, the more unconscious these masks are, the more they silently control the course of life. Breaking through these masks requires practical courage. This might mean learning to say no when the automatic impulse is to please. It might mean choosing to show vulnerability instead of hiding behind a perfect image. It might mean admitting mistakes publicly without fear of judgment, and even in some cases choosing not to use your body as a form of validation. Therapeutic writing exercises help with this process, listing in a notebook the roles you feel you play in each environment, at work, with your family, with your friends, and questioning which of them still make sense. This type of practice is more than therapy. It's a ritual of spiritual liberation that brings you closer to the self. But here's the paradox. These masks, however suffocating, create the illusion of control. It's as if the woman believes that by manipulating how others see her, she'll be protected from suffering. But this control is unconscious and exacts a heavy price: superficial relationships, emotional exhaustion, and a loss of authenticity. It's precisely at this point that the bridge to the next topic emerges: inner drama. Because even hidden behind masks, the soul continues to scream, and this scream echoes in the form of emotional turmoil, painful memories, and repetitive cycles. After all, no one can silence the psyche forever. O drama interior. A woman's inner drama is like a turbulent ocean, waves of emotions that arrive from all sides without asking permission. Carl Jung asserted that the psyche is not only individual but also collective, meaning that each woman carries not only her own pain but also echoes of inherited traumas. This intensity translates into a heightened sensitivity, capable of absorbing the mood of a room in seconds or feeling pain that isn't even her own. It's like an open antenna constantly capturing emotional frequencies. This gift, when not understood, becomes torment. But when recognized as part of shadow work, it becomes a source of empathy, wisdom, and even healing, not only for oneself, but also for those around her. The problem is that this ocean is rarely calm. The ego, in its attempt to protect itself, relives past pain and projects fears into the future. Thus, the female psyche often becomes trapped in cycles of painful memories and anxious anticipations. It's as if it's constantly navigating emotional storms that never dissipate. A memory of rejection experienced in adolescence can echo in a current relationship. A childhood criticism can become an open wound in a work meeting. To cope, the persona tries to maintain a pose of control, but inside, the body feels insomnia, chronic fatigue, unexplained pain. All of these are signs that the inner drama is not being addressed with the attention it deserves. This drama is also intensified by collective factors: menstrual cycles, social expectations, family patterns, and even cultural archetypes. A woman who feels guilty for not fitting the role of good daughter or ideal mother is, in fact, reliving pressures that are not just her own, but those of entire generations. The female collective unconscious carries stories of silencing, violence, and control, and these memories emerge as invisible chains pulling us down. This is where spirituality comes in as a tool for reframing. When one understands that one is not alone in this burden, but that it is part of something greater, the pain gains meaning. And meaning is the first step toward liberation. In practice, dealing with inner drama doesn't mean stopping feeling, but learning to decode the psyche's messages. Exercises like writing a letter to yourself at the height of an emotion, practicing conscious breathing, or even using active imagination techniques, a resource Jung himself developed, help shape the chaos. A simple example: when faced with irrational fear, close your eyes and ask your inner shadow what it wants to communicate. Often the answer comes not in words but in images, metaphors, sensations. This is the unconscious trying to express itself. It's a practice of dialogue with the invisible that over time lessens the strength of the storms. However, inner drama isn't just pain, it also opens doors to unique gifts. The same woman who suffers from feeling too much is the one who can embrace a friend in tears, understand a child in silence, or perceive opportunities before they become apparent. The sensitivity that seems like a burden is actually a source of archetypal power. The challenge lies in transforming turbulence into wisdom, rather than letting it devour one's vital energy. And this is where we enter the next topic, unconscious control. Because faced with the difficulty of dealing with such intensity, many women resort to subtle mechanisms of influence and manipulation, believing that this will find stability. Unconscious control. Unconscious control is one of the most subtle paradoxes of the female psyche. Often, without realizing it, women learn from an early age to influence others not through direct force, but through invisible mechanisms. Carl Jung would call this shadow work. That which is not consciously recognized ends up manifesting itself in indirect strategies. Over the centuries, society has restricted women's space to openly exercise power. The result has been the development of alternative methods of influence: guilt, punitive silence, victimization, or seduction. These strategies, while effective in the short term, create destructive dynamics in relationships and erode authenticity. The ego believes it is ensuring survival, but spirituality reveals that, deep down, it is an unheard cry for recognition. These patterns of unconscious control often appear in everyday situations. A woman who avoids direct confrontation with her partner may instead withdraw into silence, hoping to make him feel guilty. A woman who fears losing her place at work may use small insinuations to undermine colleagues. A woman who cannot openly ask for affection may resort to victimization to obtain it. These dynamics are not the result of malice, but of deep cultural conditioning. In shadow work, seeing these mechanisms is painful because it means admitting that you have been manipulated without realizing it. But it is also liberating because it opens the space to choose authenticity over masking. And only when this choice is made do relationships become true. Interestingly, unconscious control is rooted in ancient archetypes. The witch, for example, symbolizes this power to act in the shadows, pulling the invisible strings of the collective psyche. The controlling mother is another common archetype, attempting to maintain order through guilt or overprotection. These symbols, though powerful, reveal how much women have been taught to exert influence indirectly. Carl Jung explained that integration occurs when one recognizes the energy contained in these archetypes and chooses to channel it in a healthy way. Instead of manipulation, clarity; instead of silence, communication; instead of victimization, authentic vulnerability. It is at this point that spirituality finds its most concrete expression. In everyday life, the practice of dissolving this unconscious control begins with small actions. Saying what you feel directly without beating around the bush is one of them. For example, instead of using silence to punish, saying "I was hurt by your attitude" opens the door for genuine dialogue. Instead of using insinuations at work, firmly declaring "I want this opportunity" means embracing your own value. It seems simple, but it requires practice, because the ego always tries to pull you back to old strategies. Writing can be an ally. Jot down situations in which you noticed yourself using indirect forms of influence and then rewrite them as you could act authentically. It's a reprogramming exercise that restores power to consciousness. And here's the secret. True feminine power doesn't require manipulation. It flourishes when a woman allows herself to be direct, to express desires and limits clearly without fear of rejection. This is the strength that emerges when the persona is set aside and the self begins to guide relationships. However, to reach this place of authenticity, it's necessary to confront old wounds that fuel these mechanisms. Among them, perhaps the deepest is the paternal wound, which silently shapes how a woman views authority, love, and even her own self-esteem. And it's precisely this wound that we need to talk about now. The father's wound. The father wound is one of the most silent and at the same time most profound marks on the female psyche. Carl Jung emphasized the role of the father figure as a symbol of authority, order, and connection with the outside world. When this presence is distorted, whether through absence, abuse, excessive rigidity, or weakness, the daughter's soul bears invisible scars that resonate throughout her adult life. Spirituality shows that this wound is not only individual, but also collective. How many generations have grown up without a healthy, balanced male figure capable of inspiring security? This void becomes an internal echo that shapes how women relate to love, money, careers, and above all, their own self-esteem. This wound manifests itself in many ways. Some women, for example, choose emotionally unavailable partners because they unconsciously try to replicate and heal their father's absence. Others incessantly seek approval from bosses or leaders, as if always asking for a look of recognition they never received. There are also those who become hyper-independent, building walls around themselves, swearing they will never depend on anyone. But behind this armor lies the pain of not having learned to trust healthy masculine energy. The ego creates narratives of strength and self-sufficiency, but the psyche reveals that, without integration, these choices lead to repetitions of frustration. Shadow work in this case is vital, addressing the roots of this pattern so it doesn't perpetuate itself as destiny. Archetypes help us understand this dynamic. The authoritarian father can leave marks of fear and submission, while the fragile father generates insecurity and feelings of abandonment. The absent father creates a symbolic void, leading women to constantly seek fulfillment outside themselves. Jung argued that when these archetypes are not integrated, women remain trapped in the father complex, which unconsciously directs their choices. Healing begins when they learn to activate the balanced masculine energy within themselves: discipline, protection, clarity, focus, without relying on anyone external to validate their existence. This movement is more than psychological, it is spiritual, because it realigns the psyche with its wholeness. In practice, this process can begin in simple ways. Writing letters, even if never sent, to one's real or symbolic father is a powerful way to release unspoken emotions. Therapy or women's sharing groups also help, allowing pain to emerge from the shadows and be acknowledged aloud. Even physical practices, such as martial arts or sports that require discipline, can be paths to integrating this inner masculine strength. Books like Clarissa Pinkola Estes' Women Who Run with the Wolves offer narratives that illuminate these wounds with ancestral wisdom. Each step on this path is an act of reclaiming the self, a gesture of reconciliation between what has been wounded and what can still flourish. The truth is that the paternal wound never completely disappears. It becomes a scar, a memory, and a source of learning. The woman who faces it discovers within herself a strength that no longer needs external validation. It's as if, by integrating this shadow, she begins to carry not only her own courage, but also that of all those who came before her. This is the point at which the journey begins to shine, when old wounds cease to be chains and become wings. And it is precisely at this moment that the most challenging and liberating journey of all is announced: the Great Awakening, in which masks fall, shadows are integrated, and authenticity finally emerges. The Great Awakening. The Great Awakening is like a silent earthquake within the soul. Everything that once seemed solid begins to crumble. Survival masks no longer fit, unconscious control strategies become burdensome, and even old wounds begin to scream, demanding attention. Carl Jung described this moment as a crisis of individuation, where the persona can no longer sustain the theater of life, and the self demands to be heard. It is painful because it means facing head-on the shadows that have always been avoided. But it is also liberating because, for the first time, the woman realizes that she no longer needs to live for the approval of others. Spirituality calls this process rebirth, dying to the false self and being reborn into authenticity. This awakening is often preceded by intense crises. It could be a relationship that falls apart, a career that no longer has meaning, an unexpected illness, or simply a feeling of emptiness that nothing can fill. The ego panics, seeing its strategies crumbling. But at the same time, something deeper begins to emerge, a silent force that says, "It's time to go home." Jung believed that in these moments, the unconscious sends signals through symbolic dreams, synchronicities, and even unexpected encounters. It's as if life conspires to force the psyche to realign with its essence. And as chaotic as it may seem, this chaos is actually an invitation to transformation. Awakening is not an escape from pain, but a dive into it. It's looking at the shadow without fear, recognizing patterns of self-sabotage, letting go of inherited characters, and accepting the complexity of one's own soul. Many women at this point realize they can no longer carry the burden of pleasing everyone. They need to learn to say no and make choices aligned with the self. Spirituality teaches that the soul cannot bear to live eternally in denial. Sooner or later, it calls us back to the path. This call may hurt, but it also gives rise to a magnetic authenticity. Those who awaken become mirrors for other women because their presence conveys courage without needing words. In everyday life, awakening translates into small revolutions. It could be finally having the courage to quit a job that saps your vitality, or ending a relationship that no longer honors your soul. It could be choosing a simpler, more authentic lifestyle. It could even mean exchanging automatic routines for practices that nourish the spirit. Meditation, reading authors like Jung, Clarissa Pinkola Estes, or Joseph Campbell, reflective writing, therapy, walks in nature. Each step is a symbolic act of liberation. And curiously, the more a woman aligns with this authenticity, the more synchronicities begin to occur. Unexpected encounters, doors that open, opportunities that seem tailor-made. This great awakening, however, is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a more conscious life. It marks the moment when a woman integrates feminine and masculine forces within herself, ceasing to seek outside what was already within. It is at this point that spirituality ceases to be merely a concept and becomes a daily practice, that shadow work ceases to be merely introspection and becomes real transformation. The awakened woman carries scars, but also wisdom. She carries pain, but also light, and precisely for this reason, she becomes a catalyst for change in the world. But for this journey to make complete sense, it is necessary to connect all these points into a larger narrative. And this is where the introduction comes in, which will tie together every psychological secret of the feminine that no one dares to admit. After traversing all these psychological secrets, one question remains: what will you do with this knowledge? Because it's not enough to simply understand archetypes, the ego, the persona, or shadow work. You need to apply them. How many times have you realized you're repeating painful patterns? How many times have you felt something greater calling you, but chosen to remain silent? The awakened feminine isn't content with theory. It demands practice, courage, and daily transformation. Now, it's your turn to look within. Which of these masks do you still wear? Which parental wound still governs your choices? Which intuition have you silenced to please others? And most importantly, what would change in your life if you had the courage to live without pretense? These questions aren't rhetorical. They're invitations for you to write your answer in the comments. Because when you write, you materialize what was previously only unconscious. Perhaps you've felt like you've reached the limit of repeating old stories. Maybe you know deep down that you can no longer live just surviving, carrying inner dramas without giving them new meaning. Transformation begins the exact moment you decide to stop running from yourself. Not tomorrow, not a month from now, but now. And the truth is, if you've made it this far, you've already taken the first step. So tell me, are you ready to shed your masks? Are you ready to see your own power without having to manipulate it? Are you ready to awaken? If something inside you has stirred, don't ignore it. Write in the comments. Sometimes a comment is the first symbolic gesture of someone who's ready to change their life. And if you want to continue this journey of self-discovery, spirituality, and depth with Carl Jung as your invisible guide, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, each video is more than content. It's a mirror to your soul. And with each encounter, you'll feel closer to what you've always sought, your authenticity.